Hello, everybody. Welcome to Live with Google for Nonprofits. This is episode 3. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Live with Google for Nonprofits is a twice monthly show on Thursdays in which we deep dive into various topics that you have suggested that you want to learn more about. So thank you so much for joining us today. A few reminders before we get started. You will see on the right of your screen that there is a live chat. So you can use this to communicate with us during the actual live stream. So if you have questions that come up, if you have any technical issues that you want to flag, or if you just want to let us know where you're joining us from, we would love that. Today's session will be super interactive. So our speaker, Nikki, who will be joining us, she's going to ask quite a few prompts, and we'd love for you to participate and to let us know what you think about the show. At the end, we will be giving you a survey link in which you can fill out and let us know what you think and suggest any other topics for the future. If you aren't seeing the live chat, just refresh your browser and then you should be able to see it. And as a reminder, these live shows are actually available on YouTube for you to watch anytime. So you can go back and rewatch it. You can also watch previous episodes, and hopefully you enjoy the content that we have today. So if you were here last week, you remember that we may have talked about Giving Tuesday, which is a global movement in which we really want to inspire, the world wants to inspire acts of generosity. So we actually just heard that in Giving Tuesday, over $2.4 billion were donated to nonprofits around the world. So that's something to celebrate. So for those of you who did Giving Tuesday campaigns or took any of the tips from our Giving Tuesday speaker, congratulations. So this week, we are excited to bring in a member of the Google for Nonprofits team to introduce himself, and his name is Kyle. So I'll be bringing him on now.
Hello, everybody. As Isha said, my name is Kyle. I'm a software engineer on the team. Sometimes you see from our support team something like, our software engineers are working hard to solve this problem. Well, that's me, or me and my team. We're always doing our best to solve your problems, to make the experience as best as possible, get you access to the products that you need, the things that you need and deserve on it to work with on a day-to-day basis. I was drawn to Google as a company because of the giving that it does. I think it's a really unique part of our culture, whether that's through the Google.org grants or like my team is doing, giving out free or discounted products. And I just really like this space, the nonprofit space. It's something that I learned from my mother. She dedicated her life to being a social worker and helping others that were less fortunate than us. And I've taken that to heart. That's something that I want to do, now as myself, as an adult. And doing it at Google is an amazing place. But really, also, I just want to thank everybody out there. It's been a tough year, or probably multiple years for some organizations. So while my problems I work with, as an engineer while I'm coding is, making sure I'm putting the parentheses in the right places. Whereas a lot of you all are probably hands-on in the field, perhaps giving out food at a food shelter, or maybe something global like trying to work on climate change problems. Like those are big things, and as much as I'm trying to help you through software, as much as Google is trying to help you out, you're doing the real work, and I just want to thank everybody for doing that. Back to you, Isha.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Kyle. We're so happy to have you join us. As he may have mentioned, he does a lot of the work behind the scenes, so we're really happy to be able to see Kyle on screen with us, and thank you for telling us your story. All right. So now we will move on to the main programming of the show. So today we're excited to bring on Nikki. Nikki spends a lot of time thinking about inclusivity practices for students at Google. So she has a lot of tips that she's learned and excited to share with you. So I'll go ahead and bring her on.
Thanks, Isha, and thanks, Kyle, for all the work that you do to support Google for Nonprofits. And most importantly, thank all of the nonprofit leaders for being here today. We know that there's so much going on, and the fact that you're here for a lot of you guys, for a lot of y'all after work, means that you're committed to doing what it takes to make sure that you can help your communities navigate through this time, in addition to just helping yourself navigate through this time. And we know it's been a lot. So thank you all for being here and for sharing and building our collective knowledge together. One of the reasons I'm so excited to be here with y'all is because there's so much expertise in the room already. And I hope that as we talk about how do we make meetings and events more inclusive, especially in a virtual setting, that we have some time to actually hear from each of y'all and the brilliance that's already in this room. So thank you so much for being here today. You are going to need a pen or a pencil and a notebook. So take a minute to go rustle or grab one of those. And as folks are getting their notebook ready, we'll use that at the end of the session. Go ahead and share the name of your organization and your favorite pizza topping or style. And again, you can use the YouTube live chat that's on the bottom of your screen to submit those things. So thank you for getting your pen and pencil, and then tell us the name of your organization and your favorite pizza topping or style. We'll give you guys about a minute to get settled. And I'm personally a deep dish fan because I am in the Chicago office. Welcome, Marco. Welcome, Chris. Take 10 more seconds to grab your pen and pencil and get ready. And while we're waiting, the name of your organization, your favorite pizza topping or style. Deep dish is very contentious. Not sure if there's any New Yorkers. All right, thank y'all for sharing. So today we're gonna talk, like Isha said, about what does it mean to be inclusive normally, but especially how can we use those inclusion principles in a virtual setting as we're all trying to navigate our new realities. So before we kind of talk about inclusion principles, it's important to kind of frame this conversation around what inclusion is. And a lot of us might be familiar with the term diversity, right? So that's who's in the room, right? Like who's invited to your meeting, who's invited to your event, who are the participants in your program. But inclusion is really when those participants, when those team members have an equal chance to have their ideas be amplified and have equal decision-making power. So diversity is kind of who's in the room. Inclusion is how they're experiencing the event, the meeting, or the program. So as part of a large team at Google, we had to think really critically about how we're supporting students through our programs, ranging from our internship to our summer boot camps. And so we were really mindful of how can we think about making all of these virtual spaces where they're truly inclusive, where all of our ideas are amplified, and that our participants and the people on our teams hold equal decision-making power. So in order to kind of think through what these inclusive principles might look like, we went outside to experts. We looked at academic journals, equity frameworks, teaching and learning communities, and then external practitioners, folks like y'all in the field who are already doing this incredible inclusion work. We synthesize all of the literature resources that we read through into 3 principles. So today we're going to talk about each of these 3 principles, and then we're going to talk about an illustrative example of how a nonprofit might use one of these principles. And then we're going to open up the chat to make sure that we get, again, the expertise that's in this room and in this space to understand how you are already maybe using some of these inclusion principles. So the first principle that we came across repeatedly over and over is this idea of building and maintaining a growth mindset. So what this looks like is being very explicit that participants need to hear that they can work on skills over time. Whatever your end goal is with your participants in your program or even within a meeting, people need to be reminded that these skills accrue over time. One way to do this is to create a structure and a process to celebrate wins, and also a maybe different discrete structure or process to share gratitude. So as an example, CS First, which is a Google program, gives teachers an opportunity to have a board where they can post shout-outs. So students write on Post-it notes, and they're able to, at the end of each class, shout out a teammate and build this community. And it reminds people that we're in this space together. Another way to think about growth mindset is a lot of times in programs or in nonprofits, we think about having like evaluative assessments at the end, summative assessments, right? Like how are they doing maybe after 6 weeks or after 3 weeks? What about after each moment or after each meeting or session, we have the ability to write something that we're proud of, right? We can see our growth each session because we have a structure and system in place that allows us to document and share the things that we're proud of. So how we might think about this in a virtual setting is, if y'all aren't familiar with Google Jamboard, it's a tool where, similar to these Post-it notes, right? Different participants or maybe different team members can take time to either share gratitude or share a win that they had that week. And this is a really easy way to build this growth mindset virtually. So would love to hear from y'all. What are some ways that you already are embedding a growth mindset, or how might you embed a growth mindset into your meetings, events, and programs? We'd love to hear from all of y'all. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to kind of think about it. And as y'all are thinking, you can type your response into the chat. And then when I say waterfall, you're going to hit enter. And as a bit of a note, this is a bit of an inclusive practice called a stop and jot. We're giving everyone time to reflect. And only when I say waterfall are we going to hear everyone's answers. And this kind of levels the playing field. So take a minute in the chat to write down, how might you, or how are you already embedding a growth mindset into your programs? We'll take a minute. So take about 30 more seconds. We'd love to understand it from this collective brain trust, how you and your nonprofits might already be using this idea of growth mindset. And you're typing this into the chat, but we're going to hold off so we can share at the same time. Take 15 more seconds to wrap up your comment, and then we'll hit enter in about 10 seconds. All right, waterfall. Go ahead and share, hit enter, and share how you're using the idea of growth mindset in your programs. There's so much expertise in this room. Thank y'all again for sharing. So there might be a bit of a delay. I can't read everyone's comments immediately, but hopefully these are helpful for y'all to kind of understand how other people are applying growth mindset and some best practices that you can steal from national nonprofits around the globe. So the first one is growth mindset. How can we create structures and processes to allow people to both share gratitude, but share their small wins along the way? The next principle that we came across was this idea of co-creation. For a lot of us, we only have a single lived experience, and it's really important for us to understand other people's experiences and invite them into the design of our programs, of our events, and of our meetings. So in order to make sure that we're truly co-creating alongside our participants, alongside impacted communities, it's really important that we collect feedback early and often, what they need, what's working, what's not, to really make sure they have that sense of ownership and agency. And when we think about a virtual world in particular, what are the immediate needs that they have, and how can we maybe deprioritize everything else? How can we make sure that whatever resources we're providing are accessible across devices, including mobile devices? And then finally, what content can we provide that is asynchronous, meaning they don't have to be somewhere sitting in a seat at a certain time. They can access that content as they need it. So when we talk about co-creating the environment, we're giving multiple ways for people to be involved that might look a little bit different than an in-person event or an in-person program. As an example of what this looks like, I'm really proud to be a CodeNation volunteer and have seen CodeNation co-create alongside their students this year, which has been completely remote. What CodeNation does is they use this idea of CoGens, which was created by Dr. Chris Edmond. The idea is, instead of kind of trying to solve problems as a nonprofit, kind of in our own little bubble, we want to invoke the help of our participants. So we might tap 2 or 3 of our participants on the shoulder and say, hey, we're kind of struggling with something. Will you come and brainstorm and help us implement our shared solutions? So for example, in CodeNation, we might have a CoGen topic where we're saying like, hey, students are a little bit not engaged. They're not sharing their answers during the virtual session. Can you 3 help us figure out and implement a solution to have that happen? Sorry, I just had kind of a weird pop-up on my screen. So the idea of CoGen is we're bringing our participants or we're bringing our teammates in a small group to help solve the problems that we're navigating, especially as we think about our new reality. So this idea of co-creation certainly isn't new in the nonprofit space. And I think there's probably a lot of examples of how y'all are co-creating either with your teams or with your participants or the communities that you work alongside. So let's again take some time in the chat to write down how do virtual settings make it easier to co-create alongside our participants? What have y'all seen that's working? And what do you want to share with the rest of us? So we'll take a minute to do that. Awesome. Thank y'all again for sharing this brilliance, this collective brain trust. Take another 30 seconds to type those in. And take 15 more seconds to think about how do virtual settings actually make it easier to get that feedback, to invite that participation, to work alongside our participants. All right, and I actually can't see the chat too well, but if you haven't, we're gonna say waterfall, go ahead and enter, and we should see some beautiful examples and ideas from your colleagues pop up. Awesome. I love the comment by Consumer Doctors to say, sharing information through mobile technology. That's a great way to make sure that you're mindful and still giving folks an avenue to co-create the environment, because even if they can't access a laptop or a computer, they're still part of the community and they're still creating and being a part of your virtual space. Counting Coral says Basecamp, which is another way to collaborate and invite multiple people into these spaces and kind of open up the audience. Thank you for sharing, Counting Coral. So we've gone through 2 principles so far. Let's take a look at our final one. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but oftentimes we think that we have all the answers, or we want to pretend that we have all the answers, but especially as we're navigating through a changing world, we want to make sure that we understand our own bandwidth and capacity. And we also want to make sure we acutely understand the bandwidth and capacity and realities of the people we're working alongside, whether that's people in meetings, our teammates, our colleagues, or whether that's our participants or the community at large. So let's name the obstacles, right? Like, if we are honest about our realities and naming the obstacles, then they are diagnosed and then we can solve them. But until we name them, it's really hard to solve around them. We also want to make sure that we prioritize socio-emotional learning and well-being. If we remember back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if people don't feel safe, secure, supported, that they have what they need on a fundamental level, whatever goal you're trying to get through with your program isn't going to happen. So how can we check in with the participants and say, like, what do you need in this moment? And let's take care of those immediate needs. And then maybe we can think about the ancillary mission that maybe your nonprofit is providing, right? Finally, in a lot of our nonprofits, reporting is a big thing. We want to get those metrics in. But maybe this year we can think about, how can I be a little bit more flexible with my assessment and with my accountability structures? We still want to make sure that we're driving towards our end goal, but how can we be a little bit more flexible in how we get there this year? As an example of what this might look like, this 3rd principle, I was really excited to see another organization that I'm a part of outside of Google is IEEE, which is a society for professional technologists. And a reality for a lot of folks is that there's a lot going on in their home life. And more importantly, it should be private if they choose for it to be. So a tip that I have is maybe consider using branded backgrounds, right? Maybe you have your nonprofit logo at the top, like IEEE does. And this way, you can invite people into this space, but you're validating the reality that they might want to keep their home lives private. And so this is a really good example to think about. We understand why you might not want to show up virtually, but here's a little scaffold of support that will make it a little bit easier. So this idea of validating realities both goes for your team and org. How has your own bandwidth changed? But also for the participants and the communities that you work alongside. So have really enjoyed seeing a snippet of some of these examples. What are some of the ways that you have adapted either your meetings within your team, your events, or your longer term programs to meet these new realities of your team, of your participants, or of your volunteers? And again, we'll take a minute to type those into the chat. We won't use a waterfall, we'll just see them come in as they go. So thank you again for sharing those, and we'll read out some of the ones that catch our eyes. So let's take a minute to share with the group, how have you adapted your events for these new realities? Awesome. This is exactly why Google for Nonprofits set this up, is so we can collectively share how we're all navigating these new changes. Love the answers coming in. Take 30 more seconds. I love the idea of streaming and podcasting, right? Not only is that accessible, people can access it if they need to be, walking their dog or taking their kids somewhere. So consumer doctors, thank you for sharing that. Great idea. We also have a Google site, right? That's super important. It helps. Maybe you only were doing in-person programming and that was your source of truth. So figuring out a really simple way, like a Google site, to still have your participants be able to access the information that maybe you're providing in person, but virtually. I love this. And I love the fact, right, there actually are a lot of silver linings, like Counting Coral said. A lot of times we can have more accessibility, either with our time or space, because we're allowed to be virtual. So as we kind of summarize these 3 principles and kind of take stock of how are we building and maintaining a growth mindset for our programs, how are we co-creating our environment alongside our participants, and how are we understanding acutely what we need and how our bandwidth has changed and what our participants or volunteers might need. It's important that we all kind of summarize what this could look like. So this might not quite work as well through the YouTube comments, but we're going to try it. And it's also a good thing to model how we might split people up virtually. If your name starts with the letters A through G, you're going to take a minute to write down how you would personally summarize building and maintaining a growth mindset. If your name starts in the middle of the alphabet, you're going to summarize the second principle. And if your name starts with the end of the alphabet, P through Z, you're going to summarize the third principle. And then collectively, we're going to make sure that we check our understanding and that we understand all 3 of these principles. So go ahead and take about 30 seconds in your own words to summarize either principle 1, 2, or 3 based on the letter of your first name. So it'll take 30 seconds to do that. And this is where your notebook comes in handy. Take 30 more seconds again to summarize these in your own words. Again, this is a great way to kind of make sure these kind of stick. And then as you go back to program design, you can think about each of these 3 principles. All right. So collectively, before we get into Q&A, would love to just understand in your own words what we think these principles mean to us, right? So one of the first ones was building and maintaining a growth mindset. So what do we have some answers for this one? Awesome. Counting Coral was in the front of the alphabet. And they said, share every win. I love this. Share every win, no matter how small. Maintain. I'm going to have some typos here. Maintain the small wins. Good. Keep every engaged. Awesome. And if you were in a meeting where you could have people unmute and share, right? This is a good way to kind of a collaborative brainstorm, right? And you're kind of typing people's answers. Awesome. So someone that was in the middle of the alphabet, what's a way that we can co-create the environment? So how might you make sure that you're not the only decision maker in the room, that you're really elevating and amplifying the voices either on your team or from your volunteers or from your participants? So for this one, I might cheat and actually say what we're doing right now, right? Just because you're on a virtual call doesn't mean you can't invite participants to share their expertise, right? So set aside time in the agenda to ensure that participants can share their wisdom. And if there's any other ideas about how you might co-create the environment in a virtual setting, please let us know. All right, and then the last one, someone that was towards the bottom of the alphabet, their first name. How might we understand, how would we synthesize what it means to understand your own reality and validate one another's realities? What does that look like? How can we summarize that as an inclusion principle? Awesome. Thank you, consumers doctors. So the summary here is that you should write kind of a universal message, right? Message that has to impact everyone. Yeah, that's a perfect one, right? Like think about like how has your messaging changed and how can we make sure it meets our new realities and meets the moment? So again, these are 3 principles that personally I think you can use to think about inclusion, whether you're virtual or in person. But I think especially now, it's so important to celebrate those wins, to co-create the environment, to constantly be asking for feedback early and often. And then finally, to just be honest with the realities that we're all navigating, and make sure you let your participants know and your teammates know, like, hey, we know this is tough and we're doing this together and we can adjust and be flexible to meet your new needs and your new realities. So thank you again for sharing all the incredible wisdom out there. We're excited to get into some Q&A and talk a little bit more about how we've used these inclusion principles at Google. But also as y'all continue to participate and collaborate in the chat, we'd love to hear maybe how you might respond to some of the questions that we get. So thanks again for being here, for being so engaged, and for sharing your expertise today. It was really great collaborating with y'all.
All right, thank you so much, Nikki. This was super, super interesting. I think we can all relate to a lot of these issues and really take these solutions to make sure our meetings are more inclusive and more engaging. I know when we started going virtually, we definitely felt like there were fewer touch points to have an engaging meeting. And some of these things I've learned a lot from, so I'm excited to continue to implement these things in my own work as well. We do have time for live Q&A, so we hope that you're using the live chat for asking any questions that you may have for Nikki. In the meantime, we'll give everybody a few minutes to put in their questions with a couple reminders. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you subscribe, you will be getting more notifications of when our upcoming live streams are. And you can actually set a reminder for the next episode on December 17th. In the next episode, we will be talking about how to manage your inbox. We know with the holidays coming up and people often are taking some time off of their day-to-day work lives, it's really important to kind of clear up your email inbox, make sure it's well organized. So we'll be bringing in a subject matter expert for that. And we're excited to tell you more about ways to make sure that you feel organized and productive using Gmail. And a couple other things is, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Please follow our Twitter channel for more updates. We also share a lot of nonprofit stories on our Twitter channel. So if you're looking for ways to be inspired by what other members of the community are doing, and to get some tips and tricks from Google, please follow that, as well as our Facebook. And then we do have a community forum at this link. You can post questions about using Google for nonprofits. If you have any questions about specific products that you're looking for to have an idea of which direction to find the answer that you need, you can post there, and members of the community as well as us will be responding to those questions. So it's a great portal to make sure that you know where to find information that you need. Additionally, we love to hear your feedback. We want to know what you think about these live streams and how we can continue to make them better. So please fill out this survey. This is the link for the survey. It'll also be posted in the chat, and it'll be posted at the end. You can also submit ideas for what you want us to feature. So some things we've already heard is our deep dive into Google Analytics. So we're scheduling that one for next year. We also heard that inbox management was something that you're interested in learning more about, which is why we scheduled that for 2 weeks from now. Additionally, optimizing your YouTube channel, Google Sites, things like that are what we'll be covering based off your responses. So your responses definitely matter to us, and we'd love to hear what you think. All right, so now we'll take some time to go through some live Q&A. So let's see. So we actually have a question about how to manage your inbox from William. How to manage your inbox when you have lots of volunteers and you can't get into a unified messaging app. So if we have any ideas for that. So that's a great question, William. Nikki, if you have any ideas, please shout them out. But I also recommend attending the next session where we'll deep dive really into inbox management. But in the meantime, Nikki, if you have anything to give advice to, that would be awesome as well.
Yeah, I actually wrote down the fact that y'all are having an inbox session, because I know I personally could use that. William, one little Google trick that I really like is that if someone is sending you an email, they can always append a plus and a certain topic to the end, right? So let's say you have a set of different volunteers and they're all maybe grouped by grade level, for example, or they're grouped by neighborhood. Anyone that's trying to send you a message from a certain neighborhood, right, could say like to William Pitcher plus the name of that grouping or categorization at gmail.com. And that way you can start filtering those groups a little more obviously and automatically. It's all going to go still to you, but by using that plus as a feature of Gmail, you can add some automated features. And maybe someone that's helping on the chat can drop like a little how-to in there. Oh, nice. We already knew it. Perfect.
Oh, that's great.
Next week, I'm sure there'll be tips that we both can learn from.
Yeah, I'm super excited for next week. So I think that'll all help us before the holidays, making sure that we get to inbox zero. Another question from Consumers Doctors, how to use resources to raise revenue for nonprofits. So I'm assuming this is a question about using Google tools for fundraising, I think, is something that this might be helpful for you. And one thing that you can do in terms of using resources is using ad grants. Ad grants, for those of you who don't know, eligible nonprofits that are eligible for Google for nonprofits can activate ad grants, which offers $10,000 USD per month of search-based ads in which you can raise awareness of your mission. You can find donors, inspire donors with your story. We also recommend making sure that you build out your YouTube channel with a lot of storytelling. This is a great way to inspire people to feel compelled to donate towards your mission, helping you to raise revenue. So those are a few tips. We do have more tips about specifically fundraising and using ad grants, and you can find those things in our help center. We also have a step-by-step tutorial that's called by Applied Digital Skills that teaches you how to build and launch an ad grants campaign. And if you haven't seen the first episode of this series, it goes into depth of where to access that tutorial to get you set up on ad grants. Awesome. So I think one other question that I've been hearing a lot is about virtual fatigue. So I know a lot of us are going from an environment maybe last year or earlier this year where we could be in person, engaging with other people, brainstorming, getting ideas from one another. And now oftentimes our meetings are virtual, in which we're we're sitting on our laptops, we're in these virtual meetings all day, and it can be pretty exhausting. So Nikki, do you have any ideas for ways that we can help manage the virtual fatigue, both for ourselves and for our teammates?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is really real. And I think a lot of us over-index on like, while we do want to co-create and make sure we have a lot of voices making our decisions, we don't necessarily need everyone in the room for every single meeting. And even for every single program that you might have done an 8-hour long, day-long session earlier, you might think about like, how can I prioritize to make sure that I'm getting exactly the right people in the room for the right decisions or for the right outcomes. So one way that I like to do this is when I put together an agenda for a meeting, I do something like this. And so essentially, I kind of think about like, what are the goals that I'm trying to get out of this event, out of this program? Who's going to be there? And that way I'm kind of checking, do they need to be there? And whose voices am I missing? And then how can I quickly write a little summary of the context for my meeting and then time bound that, right? We've all been to meetings that go way too long. So if I want to say I have 3 goals and 30 minutes and I don't want it to go over, how could I time bound those a little bit more to make sure that everyone gets back and can kind of step away from the screen? So I think there's really a few things. Be really explicit about why you're bringing people together and asking for this precious time. Figure out who needs to be there and who doesn't, but be mindful of maybe whose voice is missing. Provide any context you can ahead of time so people can self-opt to say, like, is this going to add value? Or is this just clutter in my otherwise very packed virtual day? And then finally, let's keep it short and sweet by time bounding each part of our agenda to match the initial goals that we planned at the top of our agenda.
Oh, that's super interesting. So I guess these are also good tips for keeping an agenda more inclusive as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if my screen is sharing anymore, but
I can add it on.
Yeah, perfect. That's kind of how we think about, how I think about creating agendas personally at Google, right? So we have like, here are the goals, here's who's going to be there, here's a little bit of context so people can take a look ahead of time, get refreshed. We don't have to spend 15 minutes like talking about why we're here. Like, people know why we're here. Let's get these done, right? And so this is a good way to think about creating your agenda in a way that's both inclusive but mindful of the virtual fatigue.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then are there any other questions before we wrap up? Otherwise, also, Nikki, if you have anything else that you want to add, feel free to do that now too.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for the incredible work. Isha, I know from you that this is such a robust community that's making such great impact across communities around the world. So thank y'all for not only doing the work, doing it in an especially challenging time, but also being here and kind of helping all of us get even better at the impact that we're trying to create. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I think this information that you're giving us is extremely relevant right now, and I think it'll continue to be in the future. And any ways that we can learn to make our virtual meetings more inclusive and engaging are great tips for all of us in these virtual work environments now. All right, so I think that we have completed all the questions that you have given us. If there are any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then our teammates in the chat will continue to answer them. I'm going to flash up a couple more reminders just in case you forgot. But as a reminder, these are our social channels. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us, and then let us know in our survey how we can continue being more helpful for you. The reason we set up these Live with Google for Nonprofits live streams is we had feedback from nonprofits around the world that they'd love more touch points with subject matter experts at Google, as well as people externally who may have great advice for nonprofits. So we saw that there was a good opportunity to continue sharing that knowledge. So we set up these live streams. So we love your ideas and we'll continue to do so. Another thing to keep in mind is that our next episode is December 17th. So you can actually set a reminder for that now on the YouTube channel. If you go to our actual YouTube channel, you can see that the next episode is episode 4 on December 17th. Set a reminder. You'll see the playlist of Live with Google for Nonprofits episodes. And then you can continue to watch these episodes again in the future. If there's something that you're thinking, oh, I remember hearing this and I really want to be reminded of it, then you can actually go back and rewatch this. So feel free to do that. We also heard in the live chat that the closed captions weren't actually working. We're so sorry about that. I think there might be a technical issue with our captions. We'll make sure that the captions are posted after the event, after this live stream ends, so that you can for sure use that functionality. Once again, we apologize about that. And perfect. And thank you so much for letting us know, so we can make sure to prevent that from happening again in the future. All right. So thank you again so much. And let us know in the live chat and in the survey what you think.